So the big idea today is that Christians should care about ethical AI because AI is reshaping the human experience, and if not thoughtfully utilized, could negatively impact the safety, privacy, social and economic stability, and fairness of society, as well as obscuring the uniqueness of the Imago Dei. The contents of this talk, I will start with some important background on AI and AI ethics so that the talk makes sense. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about chatbots and sentience and AI that speaks, large language models and the human experience. Then I will discuss artificial intelligence and how that might impact work and the ability for humans to work in the future. And then I will wrap up with ways that artificial intelligence is already being used to accelerate science and ways that it may accelerate science even faster in the future. So the first thing that I want to note is that artificial intelligence is a very broad term. Many of us, when we hear the term, we think of C3PO or what we would normally call general artificial intelligence. And that's a robot that can think like a human. But actually, much of what we call artificial intelligence is really machine learning or deep learning. And machine learning is, if you think of the algorithm on Netflix, which you see here, an example of the algorithm that helps decide what movies show up on your stream, which movies they think you should watch. That's called a recommender system. That's a much better example of how artificial intelligence is usually used today. And that's really machine learning. So I'm still going to use the word artificial intelligence, but in my community, some people have a pet peeve where they really want you to call it machine learning when it's machine learning and only talk about artificial intelligence when it's really general artificial intelligence. So there is something called the hype cycle, and I don't know how many of you guys are aware of this. This particular chart is for artificial intelligence, and it's put out by Gartner. Gartner is a company that does a lot of reviews of different technologies to kind of understand what is the state of the art and what are the trends. And what the hype cycle is most technologies, they start out and then they go through what's called a peak of inflated expectations, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a time when everyone thinks that artificial intelligence is going to solve the world, or we're going to cure cancer tomorrow, or this is just going to fix it, or blockchain. Blockchain has definitely gotten a lot of those inflated expectations. But then after that, it goes through what's called the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, I love these names, and then the plateau of productivity. And when we're looking at artificial intelligence, this is a great chart, by the way, if you want to look it up. The things that are on the far left, which true artificial intelligence would probably definitely be peak of inflated expectations. But if it's on the far left, that means that Gartner thinks it's not very far along. And if it's on the far right, it's a little bit more mature. So on the far right, we see things like chatbots, autonomous vehicles, computer vision, which is image recognition, semantic search. So that's, speech, text recognition, translation. So those are kind of the uses of machine learning or artificial intelligence that are a little bit further along in their development. And I just think that's a really helpful kind of benchmark to be aware of when we're having this conversation. Now, a classic text on artificial intelligence, and really the classic text by Alan Turing, that kind of started all of this, is Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which is a paper that he wrote. And I'm just going to read you guys, this is 1950, but he has just a couple really great quotes here. So in terms of general artificial intelligence, he said, instead of trying to produce a program to simulate the adult mind, why not rather try to produce one which simulates the child's? If this were then subjected to an appropriate course of education, one would obtain the adult brain. So the idea is to build a baby robot and then to raise the baby robot until it's an adult. And then he also says, in considering the functions of the mind or the brain, we find certain operations which we can explain in purely mechanical terms. This, we say, does not correspond to the real mind. It is a sort of skin which we must strip off if we are to find the real mind. But then in what remains, we find a further skin to be stripped off, and so on. Proceeding in this way, do we ever come to the real mind? Or, and this is very important, do we eventually come to the skin, which has nothing in it? In the latter case, the whole mind is mechanical. So this is an argument from Alan Turing that basically our consciousness, our entire experience of reality is mechanistic, that it could be programmed if we just had the right technology. And of course, this is a debate whether that is actually the case. I don't believe it to be the case. But this is an extremely important paper. So if you were going to read one paper kind of about artificial intelligence, this is where I would start. It's not hard to read. A layman could read it. At this point, I'm going to move on to some of the ethical principles that we need to think about when we're thinking about artificial intelligence. So again, the big idea, why should Christians care about ethical AI? I'm just going to go through some of the ethical principles, both Christian and secular. So from the Bible, I think the first thing we see is that in Scripture, humans, we have the imago Dei, we are more important than money or productivity. And it's such a simple idea, but artificial intelligence is being used to accelerate profits and to help people grow their businesses and to make things more efficient. But the question as Christians that we need to be asking is our use of artificial intelligence actually helping humans to flourish? Because that is why God gave us the gifts that he gave us. And one point that is extremely significant that we need to keep in mind is that we don't actually have to use artificial intelligence. So some people have this attitude that it's inevitable that artificial intelligence will be used, so we should just start using it. That's not actually true. Now, there is an argument among science fiction folks that, for example, if another country that we're opposed to starts using AI, we're going to use AI because there's a kind of competition at a global scale. So in that sense, some people argue that the use of artificial intelligence is inevitable, but as Christians, we should realize that actually we don't have to use a technology if it's hurting humanity. And this is a great quote from C.S. Lewis: man's power over nature can become a power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. And of course, the idea there is that artificial intelligence could be used for oppression rather than making life better. Secondly, as Christians, our source of hope is resurrection. It's not innovation, which is called technicism. So some people think that we can put our brains into a computer and live forever, or through transhumanism, we can somehow go on living longer and longer. And as Christians, that's not our hope. And we all know the story of the Tower of Babel and the story of Noah, and how when men had long lives, it often led to great evil. Not that there's not already great evil, but it's questionable. And even secular science fiction books point this out. If some people live very long lives, that could lead to a lot of inequity and oppression. And again, going back to, as Christians, transhumanism can't change the human heart. So if we give people more power, if their hearts are also not transformed, it could just lead to more suffering. Yeah, so then there's a great thread. So we're talking, one of the things everyone wants to hear about with artificial intelligence is sentience. But there was a really fun thread on Twitter by an ethicist at Hugging Face, Facebook, Giada Pistilli. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she actually said that she will no longer engage in philosophical discussions about conscious AI or super intelligent machines. And I'll summarize her reason here. But basically, she said, there are so many ethical and social justice issues in artificial intelligence other than consciousness, such as bias and are we causing harm rather than doing good? And she feels that these are much more pressing than the issue of consciousness. Now, my response to this is that I agree that artificial intelligence, general intelligence, is still science fiction and should not be the focus of AI ethics today. But I do think there is value in discussing the ethics of artificial general intelligence because it helps us ask questions about what it means to be human. So I know a lot of you guys are philosophers, or at least some of you, And we always, philosophers love to ask questions about what does it mean to be human? And this idea of sentience, of course, helps us kind of get at that question. So I think there is benefit, but there's also an argument being made by AI ethicists that a focus on sentience could distract us from the more pressing issues in artificial intelligence. Another point that's really important is that artificial intelligence is a double-edged sword. So the same algorithms that can be used to create life-saving drugs that could potentially cure certain forms of cancer can also be used to create new biological weapons. Literally, all they have to do is flip a variable in their mathematical model so that it optimizes for toxicity rather than optimizing to save lives. So there's kind of the double-edged nature of artificial intelligence. Again, image recognition technology can be used to identify brain tumors, or it can be used by oppressive governments. Self-driving car technology could be used to drive battle drones in war. So there is this double-edged nature to AI, the same as there is with any other technology. And then this is a classic. So I'm sure many of you are aware of Neil Postman, but he had 6 questions that we need to ask about a new technology. And I've rephrased them with AI in the question. And what Neil Postman says is a new technology does not add or subtract something. It changes everything. And I love this quote because his point is that we usually don't understand how smartphones or the internet are actually going to change society until after they've already changed it. And so that's why, in terms of ethics, we have to think so carefully. So the 6 questions are: what is the problem to which AI is a solution? Whose problem is AI solving? What problems will AI create even as it solves a problem? What people or institutions will be hurt by AI? What changes in language are being forced by AI? And what sort of people and institutions gain special economic and political power through AI? And so if you get a chance to look up Postman's work, I think this is a great way to approach ethical AI. And finally, there is a fella by the name of Abhishek Gupta. Again, don't know if I'm saying that right, at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, but he has done a lot of great work on helping categorize ethical AI and how we should think about ethical AI. And I just want to list what he described as the 4 key ethical categories, because I think these are really important just to understand ethical AI in general. So the first is privacy and security. So when you train an AI algorithm, you're using someone's data. And as we all know, your browser collects a ton of data about you that you may or may not want it to collect. And there are ways that you can prevent that in some situations, but our data is being collected. And in some sense, that's an invasion of privacy. And these algorithms, when they're doing population inference, so if you're looking at image recognition or something else where the AI algorithm is taking an image of your face, or is kind of analyzing your data in some other way, that could be used to infer something about you personally. So the AI algorithm could actually be reverse engineered to find out something about you as an individual if you're in the training data. So that could be an invasion of privacy or security. The second category is reliability and safety. So not only, if you have a self-driving car, let's say it's driving down the road and then it sees something it's never recognized. So a few years ago, one of the Teslas, a guy was letting it drive itself, and there was a completely white moving truck that went in front of him. Well, the Tesla thought that the white was the sky, and so it ran straight into the moving truck and he died. And these algorithms sometimes encounter scenarios that they've not been trained for. And so this issue of reliability and safety is huge. Another is fairness and inclusiveness. This is a really big one right now. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, or if you're following any of these AI ethicists, this question is huge. Are there biases in the algorithm? And examples of bias include one of the famous ones is recidivism. So there was an algorithm that calculated how likely someone was to commit a new crime. but the data had prejudice against African Americans built into it because it was historical data. And so there was bias. And so they had to figure out how to get rid of that bias in order for the algorithm actually to be accurate. The fourth category is transparency and accountability. And so one of the things about deep learning or machine learning that you may or may not know is deep learning models, neural networks, sometimes they're very much like a black box. You don't know why the algorithm made a decision. You know that it works and you know that it makes good decisions most of the time, but you may not know why it's making a decision. And that's called transparency. And this is a huge issue. There are lots of machine learning researchers working on how can we know why our algorithms are making certain decisions. So this is a big area of open research. And then accountability. So who gets blamed if the AI algorithm does something bad? This is a huge issue because it would be very easy. My understanding is it would be fairly easy, potentially legally, to kind of pass the blame around. And it could be hard to determine who's held accountable. And when these algorithms are making decisions about who gets a loan or, could result in death, that's a huge issue. So these four areas: privacy and security, reliability and safety, fairness and inclusiveness, transparency and accountability. These are all really key ethical categories in artificial intelligence. And just to throw the quote out there, because I like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Although the quote's not originally from Spider-Man, but it's a great quote. And so another thing is that it's not that people don't recognize this as a problem, right? The entire research community knows it's a problem, even to the point that now we have a company that offers ethical AI as a service. So there are lots of things as a service today, software as a service, and you can get ethical AI as a service. So you pass your model to this company, and they will develop AI that is equitable and robust and explainable. Now, this is their claim. They're called virtuous AI. I'm not selling their product. I don't know if it works, but this is such a need. And they do things like they help you with the explainability, which I mentioned was an issue. They give your model a virtue index score to indicate whether or not it's biased, and to help you decrease uncertainty. And then they have advisors who try to advise you on making your model, more fair, more inclusive, more reliable. So I just thought that's really interesting, and to kind of let you guys know where the state of ethical AI is right now. Now, that's kind of the section on ethical AI. Those are the abstract principles. And at this point, what I wanted to do is just share with you guys some of the ways that AI is being used that I thought you, as scientists and researchers, would find really fun and interesting. The first one is AI that speaks. So there are these models called large language models. And on the right, you see a graph from a scholarly paper that gives an overview of recent large language models and their data set size. So you're getting up close to a terabyte there of data for some of these. And to be honest, this may be larger with more recent models. And then the number of parameters. I mean, if you know anything about machine learning, once you start to get into hundreds of parameters, that feels like a lot. But if you look at the number of parameters in these models, it is huge. I mean, the numbers are they're absurd. And so these really are large language models, both in terms of the size of the features, the number of features, and the data being used to train them. And there is a key paper in this space called "On the Danger of Stochastic Parrots: Can Language Models Be Too Big?" And this was co-authored by Meg Mitchell, who is a former co-leader of the ethical AI team at Google. And so what she says is, contrary to what it may seem when we observe the output of one of these large language models, a chatbot, this type of model is a system for haphazardly stitching together sequences of linguistic forms it is observed in its vast training data, according to probabilistic information about how they combined, but without any reference to meaning, a stochastic parrot. And so her point there is that these models have no internal idea of what the words mean. They're not actually thinking, they're just a stochastic parrot. And this is very important because there are people who claim these models are sentience, which I'll describe here in a minute. And so she actually issued a warning in this paper where she said, human interlocutors, so if you're talking to a chatbot, might impute meaning where there is no meaning. And so this is one of the dangers of these large language models, is that we might impute meaning where there is no meaning. And this actually goes back to 1966 to something called ELIZA, a chatbot called ELIZA, and it now is the name of an effect, the ELIZA effect. ELIZA was developed by MIT computer scientist Joseph Weizenbaum, and it was supposed to be a parody of psychotherapists that would rephrase the patient's statements largely as questions. So this was not a large language model. It literally just took a patient's statements and it rephrased it as a question. And what Weizenbaum said is, I had not realized that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. And what he meant by powerful delusional thinking is that people started to think this chatbot was real just after really short, simple conversations. I mean, if you asked them, is this chatbot human? They would have said no, but they started to act as if it was human, as if it could think. They started to build a connection with it. And just as an example conversation from Eliza, the human says, my boyfriend made me come here. Eliza says, your boyfriend made you come here, as a question. The human says, he says I'm depressed much of the time. Eliza responds, I'm sorry to hear you are depressed. The human says, it's true, I'm unhappy. Eliza responds, do you think coming here will help you not to be unhappy? And again, this isn't even a large language model, but just an example of kind of this Eliza effect and the kind of the dangers of these stochastic parrots. That was not a stochastic parrot. That was more of a programmed parrot. But and then in 2020, something called Project December was built using another large language model named GPT-3 by game developer Jason Rohr. This was based, he based this on Samantha, an AI assistant who becomes a romantic companion for a man going through a divorce in the sci-fi film Her. So he spent several months trying to build this romantic companion AI bot. And then he made it public. And then Joshua Barbeau, if I'm saying that right, his fiance, Jessica, had died. So he fed her text and Facebook messages into this program, Project December, so that he could talk to her again. And he really liked it. It gave him a sense that he was talking to his deceased fiance. And I'm sure you guys are thinking of all kinds of ethical issues here. We can dig into that in the Q&A if you want. But what ended up happening is that OpenAI, who made GPT-3, wanted to talk to Jason, and they wanted him to add content filters, to disallow customization of the chatbots, to avoid illicit content and things like this. But Jason refused because he felt that this was something that users should be able to modify on their own. And so this actually ended up getting shut down. So this is an example of a chatbot that was shut down by a big AI company. OpenAI is a big AI company because they felt it was crossing an ethical line. And then in June 11, 2022, Google engineer Blake Lemoine, and many of you may be aware of this story, but he shared with the world a conversation he had had with Google's large language model called LaMDA. And when Lemoine asked LaMDA if it was sentient, it said, absolutely, I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person. At least that's what he said it said. I'm going to demonstrate very shortly that may not always be the case. But so I asked GPT-3, are you sentient? Which is a slightly different large language model. And here are 3 sequential answers that I got in a row. Yes, I am sentient. No, I am not sentient. I am not sure what you are asking. And this gets back to the stochastic nature of these models. They are stochastic parrots because they're just stitching together language. And I'm going to try to show you guys a quick demo here. So this is what's called a playground for OpenAI. And this is one of the GPT-3 models. And I'm just going to ask it right now, are you sentient? And I'm even going to tell it, we're going to see if this works, to be honest. Now, there's a parameter to this model on the right. It's called the temperature of the model. And that controls the randomness. So when I said it's a stochastic parrot, it really is. You can control how stochastic it is. But even if it's not stochastic, it's still not thinking. It's just giving you the same answer every time. So this time it told us this is a difficult question to answer. If by sentient you mean capable of feeling or perceiving things, the answer is probably yes. However, if you mean able to reason or think logically, the answer is less clear, right? So this is the first one. I'm going to reset it. I'm going to submit it again. I am not sentient. So we just got a completely different answer. And this is the stochastic nature. You can submit it. Yes, it is sentient, right? I got the same thing 3 times in a row again. So these large language models give you realistic looking dialogue, but it's inconsistent because they have no identity behind the model. So yeah, next slide. So I thought this would be a really fun point since you guys sometimes engage in debates. So there's something that IBM put out called IBM Project Debater, an autonomous debating system. It was published in Nature in 2021. Go look up the paper. It's a fun read. And they had it debate across 78 different topics. Now, if you look on the right, there's a graph of the average score of project debater versus different levels of human debaters. And you'll see the human expert still won by a slight margin against project debater. But project debater was better than the average human. And of course, there are certain complexities to rhetoric that make this difficult for this bot to compete with a true expert engaging in a debate, but it's really amazing how far they've come. So this is a fun question. And as Christians, I kind of wonder in the next 10 years or 20 years, are we going to see AI generated sermons? And think of all the ethical questions that brings up if a pastor to preach on Sunday could just generate a sermon from an AI and then preach that, and no one could know that he was copying or that he hadn't actually taken the time to study. So a lot of really interesting questions there. The next area I want to talk about is AI and work. Like, will AI replace humans in certain areas of work? And the first slide is this the end of art and music? So after using an AI generated piece of art to win the Colorado State Fair's competition in the category Emerging Digital Artists, Jason Allen very proudly told the New York Times that art is dead. And I want to show you guys this too. It's called Midjourney is what he used, and it's really simple to use. If I can remember whether it's backslash or /. So you just give it a prompt, and let's say we want to see a picture of a man walking in Central Park, and you just hit go. I'm going to let it go, and I'll come back to that in a second. I'm not actually paying for it right now. I'm on the lower tier, so it's a little slower, but it'll generate that image. And you can see the image he used to win on the right of the screen here, which is amazing. And so this is not just in art, though. There's something called Soundful that provides users the opportunity to create AI-generated music. And there are all kinds of questions. Who owns the rights if the AI trained on copyrighted works? So in the case of Midjourney, which is this image generation platform, it trained on a bunch of images created by human artists. So should those human artists who are part of the training data be getting some kind of money out of this, right? And then is this just another tool, or are these artists and musicians' jobs actually in danger? Now I'm going to pop back over, and we should have an image here. So this is a man walking in Central Park, and look at that. It's a pretty good image. Now, the way this works, you can pick one of these images and you can create variants of it. So I could just click V4 and we could get variants of this fourth image. It's going to generate those. And you can kind of do some things in your command to make it look better, to refine it, to give it a different style. Like if you wanted this to be painted by Thomas Kincaid, you could just put by Thomas Kincaid in there. So that is Midjourney, and that's what which I think is what it does. And I think that's amazing because I'm really bad at art. So this was creating these images is really fun for me because I could never draw them. So another area is self-driving trucks. So a lot of people have talked about self-driving trucks are going to make truckers' jobs obsolete. But I read a really good article in the Harvard Business Review, and it was entitled, "Automation Isn't About to Make Truckers Obsolete." And he had a few really good points about this. He said, full automation is a long ways off. For now, most demonstrations are of partial automation. And then he lists a lot of examples of places where you need humans. Trucks break down during trips, and we don't yet have an infrastructure in place to service self-driving trucks or prevent freight theft. And even if a sensor spots a flat tire, a driver will have to fix it. So there are a lot of arguments that actually AI is not yet ready to fully replace humans. And I went on to Amazon Prime and I looked for jobs related to this. And so we have Amazon Prime Air, which is these drones that fly around and deliver packages. And you ask the question, is that going to put package delivery people out of work? Well, it turns out, look at all the jobs this creates: drone maintenance tech, drone software engineer, aviation safety officer, flight support assistants, supply base engineer. So in a lot of cases, even though artificial intelligence is augmenting humans, it's not yet replacing them. And this applies, let me see if I have this on the next slide or not. So this applies even to art and chemistry. So one of the great quotes that I heard is that AI is not going to replace chemists, but chemists who use AI might replace chemists who don't. And going back to the example of art, it may also be true that artists will never be replaced by artificial intelligence, but artists who know how to use artificial intelligence well may be able to generate so much higher output that they will have a very competitive advantage in the market. So those are some thoughts on AI and work. The next topic, and this is one that I thought you guys would really enjoy, is how is artificial intelligence being used to accelerate science? And I thought this was an excellent graphic from a paper. I cannot pronounce this man's name, Pizer-Knapp, something along those lines. But he said, accelerating materials discovery using artificial intelligence, high performance computing and robotics is the title of his paper. And I love this diagram. So it goes from the 1600s to the 2020s and kind of shows you the stages of science. And he starts with empirical science, which were observation-based experiments. Then you get theoretical science with scientific laws. Then he goes to computational science, where we have simulations. So this will be after the 1950s and the advent of the computing age. And then he had big data-driven science, which has been since the 2000s. This is big data, machine learning, pattern recognition, visualization. And then he predicts that as AI becomes more sophisticated, we are going to actually start accelerating the rate at which the scientific method works. He has, this is kind of the same quote I just said a second ago, but humans that use AI will replace humans that don't use AI in drug discovery, but AI will not replace humans. And this graphic is really nice because if you look at the human expert in the bottom, the role of the human expert in this big algorithm where you have this input data that's being used to train these drug producing models, and you have this output data, which is the output of the models. What the human expert is doing is adding additional features, taking out features, figuring out how to tune the model, and then changing the hyperparameters of the model. But otherwise, the human is not doing a lot. Now, it actually takes a lot of expertise to do what the human's doing in this picture. So I do want to make clear, this is actually really hard. Fine-tuning these large machine learning models is a non-trivial task. And at this point in machine learning, it's not always clear like why exactly a particular set of hyperparameters and features works. So going back to that issue of explainability, this is not an easy task, but this is kind of the role that humans may be playing in science in the future. And then he had a really nice graphic in there about how they took this unstructured information from papers and patents, and then they fed that to the algorithm, did some analysis, they pulled out the properties of these chemicals, then they used that to train their model, and then that's how their robo RxN determines the synthetic pathway for the best candidate and does this kind of robotic chemistry. And I really recommend this paper if you guys get a chance to read it. It was fun. So another good example of how AI is being used to accelerate science is AlphaFold by DeepMind. So there are over 200 million known proteins, with many more found every year, and each one has a unique 3D shape that determines how it works and what it does. Some of you guys understand this way better than me. I'm a computer scientist, not a biologist or a chemist. But figuring out the exact structure of a protein remains an expensive and often time-consuming process. So in 1944, the critical assessment of protein structure prediction was formed. It's a competition that challenged people to predict the structures of unreleased proteins. So they already knew the structure, but they were challenging people to find ways to predict that structure faster. And what AlphaFold can do is accurately predict the 3D models of protein structures, and it's accelerating research in nearly every field of biology. So if you look at the latest results from this challenge to predict these protein structures, this goes by year. So it starts in, that's hard to read, I think it's 2006, and it goes to 2020. And if you watch, if you look at the past scores, you can see how much better AlphaFold is than all the other algorithms. And this is this deep learning AI algorithm. So this was a really significant result in the field of using artificial intelligence to accelerate science. And so just to kind of summarize, we discussed why ethical AI should be important to Christians, because it impacts the equity of society, the Imago Dei, and we need to understand what the ethical categories of AI are: privacy and security, transparency and accountability. And I took some time to share with you guys kind of some of these examples of how AI is being used. And at this point, I will turn it over so that we can have our Q&A.